Some really scary stuff seems to be happening in our country and the wider Western world at the moment, and it's freaking people out. We seem to have lost any sense of what our core values truly are in the West. What is it that we stand for as so-called liberal democratic nations? The World War II generation is slowly leaving us. If you were born after 1933, you're now in your 90s. The elders are now the boomers, a generation who grew up in mainly boom economic times. They were in their teens and 20s during the sexual revolution and the hippie 60s, a time when the young questioned everything old, challenged all the established norms and authorities and traditions, and a lot did need to change. A bit of a shake-up was necessary. But 60 years on, and a hugely permissive and so-called progressive society, the question has got to be asked, did we throw the baby out with the bathwater a bit? As a Gen Xer who grew up in the affluent 80s, I was exposed to many left-wing philosophical ideas. A very, very simplistic worldview. Capitalism was bad, money was evil, the rich could be blamed for almost everything, and the most dangerous idea of all, the government was good and kind and would take care of everything if we just taxed the rich and redistributed the wealth. That left-wing view was kind of great. It saved me a lot of difficult thinking and hard work. It simplified the world for me into the bad rich people and the good poor people, the oppressed and the oppressors, as the socialists like to pretend. And it made my lack of personal success and struggle not only acceptable, but a badge of honour in a way. I had no idea that I'd actually been subjected to a lot of brainwashing at university. I accepted full responsibility for my decisions, but I had bought into the Marxist lefty narrative hook, line and sinker. All the artsy kids did. It was cool. It wasn't until much later in life when journalism and working in the corporate world forced me to face some facts. Other people had other ideas. Rich people weren't always mean and nasty. They were often nice and smart and very hardworking and conscientious. Corporations often did a lot of good. Capitalism was a really efficient way of getting things done in the most fair way possible. And not all left-wing people or poor people were nice and kind victims. Many brought many of their problems on themselves. And some of the biggest whingers and downers at work were the people who perpetually claimed some kind of victimhood or bad treatment. Now, I guess to most people this was just obvious growing up, but I was a slow learner. At the start of this century, I moved to Asia for work. I had a big corporate regional job and travelled all over the place. I realised that the countries that were functional and richer and worked the best had more free people and free markets and capitalism and were less corruptible. And the countries that were the most dysfunctional had less freedom, less free markets and more corruption. The main difference between the two was the size and degree of meddling of government. The more government involvement, the more waste, inefficiency, corruption and mess would result. The smaller the government and the bigger the private enterprise system was, the more wealth there was for everyone. Of course, nobody had a perfect system and the systems were mixed in many places. But generally, the smaller and less intrusive the government was, the better the outcomes. Then I came home after almost 20 years away, and just as Australia was entering the COVID crisis. And I saw a country with a lot of freedom, willingly giving it up to big government interventions and intrusions, without batting an eyelid, with almost no complaint. And when some people did complain, they were shut down, mostly by other Aussies, in the form of mass social ridicule and mockery and direct dobbing, and ultimately in the form of some of the worst police overreach ever seen in Australia's history.
Down the ground! On the ground! Anything. Oh!
The police line surrounding the shrine grew gradually tighter, with occasional forays into the crowd to pick out protesters for arrest. Many of the marchers are union members, angry at having to choose between a jab and their job. Others are venting frustration after more than 230 days of lockdown in Victoria, and with weeks more to come. Victoria is something of a paradox. It's one of the most progressive states in the country and has been ruled by Labor governments for 18 of the past 22 years.
That's ABC News. They think it's a paradox that a Labor government would become authoritarian and use brutal police force. Did they miss the 20th century or something? This was not the Australia that I left in 2001. Something big had changed. The kids weren't fighting the establishment anymore. They were the establishment. They didn't hate authority and government and resist it. Now it was cool to embrace government and do its bidding, mocking any fellow citizens who even dared to question the scientific modelling and super simplistic blanket shut everything down approach of our very silly state governments and administrators. So all that nice and kind sounding harmless stuff that I've been taught at uni in the 80s by hippie lecturers from the 60s about the left wasn't harmless after all. If you like that content and you want to watch more, join us at adh.tv for all of our great content. But also, if you watch here on YouTube, hit that subscribe button and that bell. Subscribe here if you like, or watch full episodes here. All of it helps us, and we will make sure that the awful conspiracy theory about YouTube and Google suppressing right-wing content is completely ended forever.